for us. Who was she? Who is she?
The most amazing human ever.
So beautiful, so gentle.
Yeah, caring and compassionate, and she's just full of love and life.
It was Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020. A day meant for flowers, family, and gratitude. In the quiet town of Maysville, Colorado, Suzanne Morphew supposedly set out for a bike ride. The sun was rising behind the mountains. The roads were empty, and Suzanne was never seen again. There was no phone call, no scream, no witnesses, just the jarring discovery of her bike, abandoned near a ravine. It was strangely placed, undamaged, almost staged. A helmet found later, yards away. Not consistent with a crash. Not consistent with any accident. Her phone? Gone. Data wiped. Her car? Still in the garage. Her credit cards? Untouched. Nothing stolen. No signs of struggle. And Barry Morphew, her husband, wasn't home. He said he'd left early that morning for a landscaping job in a different town. A job his coworkers said was hastily arranged. A job that, as it turns out, no one asked him to do. Barry called off the search almost immediately. Then he pleaded on camera. A tearful husband, 2 heartbroken daughters beside him. He said they'd do whatever it takes to find Suzanne. But privately, he was already telling people she was dead. As investigators dug deeper, more questions surfaced than answers. Suzanne's deleted text spoke of fear, of mistrust, of a marriage breaking down. She wrote of being scared of Barry. She wrote of wanting out. And then there was the tranquilizer gun, a used dart cap found in their home. Tranquilizer chemicals detected in Barry's truck. Suzanne's DNA on the dart cap. Barry had once worked in wildlife control. He knew how to use them, but he claimed to know nothing about it. The evidence began to build and collapse. In 2021, Barry Morphew was charged with her murder, even without a body. The world watched. But just as the case was nearing trial, it was dropped. The prosecution said it needed more time. They said they believed Suzanne's remains would soon be found. For over 3 years, her family waited. Her daughters stood by their father, and Barry maintained his innocence. Then, in September 2023, human remains were discovered, deep in the mountains of Saguache County, 30 miles from the Morphew home, buried in a shallow grave. Identified through dental records. It was Suzanne. Now, Barry Morphew has been rearrested. A man once cleared, now once again under suspicion. The charges are different. The questions remain the same. What really happened to Suzanne Morphew on that quiet Sunday morning? Was it a tragic accident no one saw? A cold and calculated act of violence? Or a murder buried beneath a web of distractions, technology, and silence? One woman, one disappearance, one man caught between sympathy and suspicion. This is the story of Suzanne Morphew, and a mystery that still haunts Colorado. Before the cameras, before the headlines, before the speculation and suspicion, there was Suzanne. Born and raised in Alexandria, Indiana, Suzanne Renee Mormon was the kind of person who lived softly, but left an impression on everyone she touched. The second of 3 daughters in a close-knit family, she grew up surrounded by faith, laughter, and a quiet Midwestern resilience. From an early age, she stood out, not for being loud, but for being kind. She would eventually go on to become a middle school teacher, passionate about shaping young lives. But it wasn't just a job. She had a gift for understanding people, especially those who felt invisible. A gentle smile, a soft voice, the kind of person who remembered birthdays, who showed up without being asked. And then came Barry, a high school baseball star, charismatic, driven, confident. He and Suzanne were married young, and together they began building a life. 2 daughters came into the world, Mallory and Macy. Suzanne poured herself into motherhood with the same devotion she had given to teaching. Friends said her girls were everything to her, the center of her world. When the Morphews moved to Colorado, it was supposed to be a new beginning, a home tucked away in the mountains. More space, more beauty, more freedom. Suzanne had battled cancer twice, first with Hodgkin's lymphoma, then breast cancer, and she had beaten it both times. Colorado felt like a reward, a peaceful new chapter. She took up biking. It was more than exercise, it became therapy. Early morning rides through winding trails. Time alone, breathing, healing. She stayed connected with old friends, even from across the country, sharing messages of encouragement, Bible verses, gratitude. On the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect life. A beautiful family, a luxury home, a strong marriage. But the truth was far more complicated. Over time, Suzanne's messages started to change. There was a growing tone of sadness, of fear, of isolation. Beneath the smiling photos and family vacations, something was breaking. She confided in friends that Barry had grown controlling, angry, that she no longer recognized the man she had married. In private text messages, Suzanne wrote words that felt final. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." She had reconnected with an old high school flame, a man named Jeff Leibler. They began exchanging messages, then calls, then video chats. Eventually, the connection deepened into an affair. It was emotional, then physical. They met secretly during trips. They spoke nearly every day, and Suzanne began to hope again. She never told her daughters, but her phone was filled with messages, diary entries, and voice notes that revealed the emotional unraveling of her marriage and the cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, she could escape it. On Saturday, May 9th, 2020, Suzanne texted Jeff. She sent selfies by the pool. She looked radiant. She seemed happy. She said she was finally going to tell Barry the truth, that she was ready to move on. The next day, she was gone. That Sunday morning, Barry claimed he left early for a landscaping job in Broomfield, 3 hours away. Security footage from a hotel showed him checking in, alone, carrying a number of strange items into the room, including a large tarp, multiple tools, and a trash bag. He would later say he was just being tidy, that he always traveled with gear. Back at home, Suzanne's phone went dark. At 2:11 p.m., her last known communication came through, a Snapchat selfie sent to Jeff. She was lying outside, her hair in the sun, peaceful, unbothered. That image would later become haunting. The last proof of life. The last trace of Suzanne before she simply disappeared. Barry said she went out for a bike ride, that she probably had an accident. But her bike was found hours later, placed carefully off the side of a steep hill. Her helmet was discovered days after, lying far from where it should have been, as if someone had thrown it. No signs of a crash. No blood. No drag marks. No prints. Just silence. The Morphew daughters returned home. They begged the public for help. Barry went on camera, clutching a photo of Suzanne, his voice cracking. But behind the scenes, friends say he refused to speak of the possibility she might still be alive. Investigators began to quietly gather digital breadcrumbs. Suzanne's phone had stopped pinging in a sudden, unnatural way. Her activity on the home Wi-Fi ceased. Her texts vanished. Some were deleted manually. And forensic data revealed her phone had been moving after she was supposedly out biking. There were scratches on the family doorframe, signs of a struggle in the garage, and most alarmingly, chemical residue in Barry's truck, tranquilizer fluid. Barry, a former wildlife worker, had access to such substances. But when questioned, he claimed to have no idea what they were talking about. None of it added up. And yet, without a body, there was only suspicion. Only fragments. Still, those fragments painted a picture. A woman desperate to escape. A marriage on the edge. A secret unfolding just beneath the surface. And a man, the only person known to be with her that weekend, left with far too many answers he couldn't explain. Suzanne Morphew didn't just vanish. She was silenced. And now, the world was beginning to ask, by who? May 10th, 2020. It was Mother's Day in Chaffee County, Colorado. The sun rose gently over the Rocky Mountains, casting its light across the quiet landscape of Maysville. And in a Morphew home, silence would soon replace what should have been a morning of joy, warmth, and celebration. Suzanne Morphew didn't respond to her daughter's messages that morning. No cheerful emojis. No Happy Mother's Day replies. Just an unsettling, unanswered void. At first, it might have seemed harmless. Maybe she was out biking. Maybe she needed time alone. But that silence? It never broke. A friend, concerned and unable to reach her, called the authorities later that day. It wasn't panic, not yet, but it was worry. Worry that something was off. That Susan wasn't just late, or busy, or distracted. That something was wrong. Soon after, officers would find Suzanne's bike, discarded at the bottom of a steep, remote hill. But the scene didn't make sense. There were no signs of a crash, no bent wheel, no scraped handlebars, no trail of blood, just a bike lying where it shouldn't be, as if it had been placed there, not fallen. And then, a few days later, they found her helmet, oddly far from the bike, not along a path, not near any logical trail, just sitting in the brush as though it had been tossed or planted. Back at the Morphew home, investigators began to retrace her final moments. Suzanne's cell phone, they discovered, had stopped pinging that very day, near her house. Abruptly, as if someone had powered it down, or destroyed it. And where was Barry? According to him, he had driven to Broomfield, a 3-hour trip for a last-minute landscaping job. He said he left early that morning, before Suzanne was even awake. But phone records and data painted an incomplete picture. At certain key moments during the day, Barry was reportedly unreachable. His story, oddly detailed in some parts, but vague in others, raised quiet questions in the minds of investigators. Why hadn't Suzanne reached out to her daughters? Why was the bike untouched, but abandoned? Why was the helmet so far from the scene? And why did everything, texts, phone signals, location data, go dark so suddenly? It was as if a thread had been cut, clean and deliberate. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a vanishing act, in broad daylight, on Mother's Day, with no one to see and nothing to find. But the deeper you look, the more it seems Suzanne never left that mountain. She didn't ride away. She was taken. As hours turned into days, and days into weeks, the small town of Maysville transformed. The quiet mountains echoed, not with laughter or birdsong, but with the thudding rhythm of helicopter blades, the hum of search drones, and the low calls of search dogs combing the wilderness. It was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a statewide mobilization. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined in. So did the FBI. They brought in teams trained for terrain like this. Wilderness experts, scent dogs, forensic analysts, digital trackers. Hundreds of hours were logged. Crews scanned rivers, ravines, mountainsides. Dogs sniffed for signs of Suzanne. Helicopters searched from above, while volunteers and officers combed the ground inch by inch. And as the cameras arrived, so did Barry. Standing in front of his home, the man once so private now spoke directly to the public. His voice cracked with emotion. His eyes, tired, swollen. He looked into the camera, holding up a poster of Suzanne. And then came the line, one that would circle the internet, news cycles, and living rooms across the country.
There, I can hear this, that has you. Please, we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. We love you, we miss you, your girls need you. No questions asked. However much they want, I will do whatever it takes to get you back. Honey, I love you. I want you back so bad.
The clip became a focal point, shared widely, dissected closely. Some believed him. Others watched and asked, was this the grief of a desperate husband or the performance of a man with something to hide? As the investigation deepened, so did the questions. Law enforcement began to notice cracks in Barry's story. His timeline didn't always match the data. GPS signals, phone records, surveillance footage. Each clue seemed to pull at a thread, unraveling the neatness of his original narrative. Footage surfaced. Surveillance cameras captured Barry making multiple stops, not for work, not for errands, but to dispose of trash. Dumpster after dumpster. Gas stations. Industrial sites. Not just once, but several times. Investigators began to ask, what was he throwing away? Meanwhile, Suzanne's digital life came under scrutiny. Text messages that had been deleted were recovered. Conversations hinted at tension, unhappiness. There were hints of fear, disconnection, and silence. A kind of emotional distance that predated her disappearance. Her phone, long gone, had gone dark at a time that didn't quite align with Barry's version of events. Its final pings raised more questions than answers. Why did it stop transmitting so abruptly? Where is it now? And what could it have captured if it had lived just a few moments longer? The image of the Morphew family, once idyllic, now began to shift in the public eye. The search for Suzanne was still active, but a second, quieter investigation had begun to form behind the scenes. An investigation into Barry Morphew. Because for all the public pleas, all the tears, all the promises to bring Suzanne back, there were things Barry hadn't said, things he hadn't explained, and places he had been that didn't make sense. As the world searched for Suzanne, detectives were beginning to look more closely at the man who said he loved her most. As the weeks dragged on and Suzanne Morphew remained missing, the case began to evolve. It was no longer just a search. It was a hunt for answers. A web of possibilities, theories, and suspects began to form, each thread more tangled than the last. And at the center of nearly every one of those threads stood Barry Morphew. To some, he was the grieving husband, broken, desperate, and misunderstood. To others, he was the most obvious suspect. The first theory was the one law enforcement couldn't shake. Barry Morphew killed his wife, not out of rage, not in a spontaneous act of violence, but something colder, more calculated. They believed it stemmed from jealousy, from years of growing distance, from a sense of control slipping through his fingers, from Suzanne's quiet rebellion, her secret conversations, her growing independence, and ultimately, her affair. Suzanne had been in contact with someone else, a man from her past, someone who made her feel heard, seen, wanted. She had written about it in her notes, whispered about it to friends. It was clear Suzanne had emotionally, and perhaps physically, left the marriage. And to Barry, that may have been intolerable. Investigators also found something else, something chilling. Barry had access to tranquilizer darts, not unusual for someone involved in hunting or animal control, especially in the rugged Colorado terrain, but strange when paired with tranquilizer caps found in places they shouldn't have been. And stranger still when you combine that with what investigators believed, that Suzanne may have been subdued, rendered unable to scream, unable to fight, before she ever disappeared. Then there was his alibi, movements that seemed erratic. Phone data showed wild back and forth drives. His work schedule changed suddenly. Trash bags dumped. Hotel stays. Odd stops in the early hours. And perhaps the most bizarre piece of Barry's defense. He claimed Suzanne may have been attacked by a mountain lion. Yes, a mountain lion. In broad daylight. Near her home. But there was no blood. No torn clothing. No signs of a struggle. It was a theory that made even casual observers raise their eyebrows. But Barry wasn't the only one people talked about. There was the lover. The man Suzanne had been secretly messaging. To some, he was a possible suspect. Had he become obsessed? Had he wanted Suzanne for himself? Or was he merely the catalyst? The reason Barry lost control? That theory sparked its own set of questions. If Barry knew about the affair, when did he find out? Was it the days leading up to Suzanne's disappearance? Or had he known long before, silently planning? Then came the stranger theory that someone unknown, unseen, took Suzanne. Maybe a drifter, a hitchhiker, a criminal passing through. The world isn't short on random evil. And stranger abductions, though rare, do happen. But in this case, there was no evidence to support it. No forced entry. No screaming neighbors. No eyewitnesses. No tire marks. No struggle. No body. Just silence. And in that silence, people began to fill in the gaps with their own ideas. Was Barry a manipulative husband who meticulously planned every step? Or was he a broken man, trapped in grief, spiraling under pressure, while the real perpetrator remained in the shadows? Was the case as open and shut as law enforcement claimed? Or had they latched onto the most convenient suspect because they had nothing else? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, unsettling, unrelenting, because as long as Suzanne was missing, and as long as no one had confessed, every theory remained alive, and every theory had someone pointing fingers in a different direction. Could Barry really have staged it all? Or did law enforcement need someone to blame? It had been a year of rumors, a year of silence, a year of hope steadily bleeding into doubt. Then, in May of 2021, authorities made a move no one expected, or maybe everyone did. Barry Morphew was arrested for the first-degree murder of his wife, Suzanne. It was the moment that shattered the illusion. The man who once tearfully begged for Suzanne's return, now in handcuffs. Charged, accused, and yet there was no body, no murder weapon, no confession, just circumstantial evidence, gathered piece by piece over the course of a year. It was a case built on shadows, on cell phone pings, deleted texts, a helmet found far too far from where it should have been. Surveillance footage of Barry making several stops to discard what he claimed was trash. A tranquilizer dart cap found in the garage. Suzanne's diary entries. Heartbreaking words of isolation and fear. And the one text that rang louder than any scream. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." The public reaction was explosive. Some believed justice was finally arriving. Others, especially those close to Barry, were torn. His daughters stood by him, unwavering. They clung to the version of their father they knew. And he clung to them, proclaiming his innocence at every turn. But the courtroom wasn't so easily convinced. As the case built momentum, the defense hit back. Hard. They called out the lack of physical evidence. They criticized the tunnel vision of investigators. And then, in April of 2022, a bombshell. All charges were dismissed. The words hung in the air like fog. Without prejudice. Meaning, the case could be refiled. But for now, Barry walked free. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. The media swarmed. And there he was, Barry Morphew, stepping into the daylight, not as a convicted killer, but as a man who had just dodged a legal. But the story didn't end there. Far from it. Barry wasn't content to simply fade into anonymity. No, he came back with fire. He filed a $15 million lawsuit against the very agencies that arrested him. He claimed he was targeted, framed, and wronged. And then, the twist that nobody saw coming. September 2023. Deep in the rugged, unforgiving terrain of Saguache County, a location more than 45 miles south of the Morphew's home, human remains were found. A shallow grave. Remote. Quiet. Cold. The forensic testing confirmed what many feared and others already believed. It was Suzanne Morphew. Buried. Alone. Left to the elements. It was a revelation that flipped the narrative. A heartbreaking confirmation of what had long been suspected, but never proven. Now, the clock reset. The case, once dismissed, was breathing again. Only now it had a body. And a grave. And one unrelenting question. Who put Suzanne there? It's now 2025. More than 5 years have passed since Suzanne Morphew disappeared on a quiet Mother's Day morning. And still, the case remains unfinished. But a storm has begun to swirl again. This time with greater force and potentially finality. In June of this year, the grand jury reconvened. And this time, they came back with a powerful message. Barry Morphew is once again indicted for the murder of his wife, Suzanne. What makes this different from the first time? This time, there's something the prosecution didn't have before: Suzanne's remains. When her body was found in September 2023, buried in a shallow grave in remote Saguache County, over 40 miles from the family home in Salida, investigators were stunned, not only by the discovery, but by what the forensic evidence revealed. Traces of an animal tranquilizer, the same kind Barry was known to use in his landscaping and deer-related work, were found in her system. That revelation alone sent shockwaves through the investigation. But it didn't end there. The forensic team suggested something even darker. Suzanne's body had likely been moved. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. Why would someone go through the trouble of moving a body several times? Was it to avoid detection during the peak of the investigation? To distance themselves from a timeline that was beginning to close in? or to make sure her final resting place was somewhere no one would think to look. And if Barry wasn't the one who did this, who else would have such access, such knowledge, and such a motive? Now, as Barry prepares for a new trial, public opinion remains split. To some, Barry is a wronged man, a father and husband caught in a nightmare, accused with no concrete proof, a man who's lost everything, including the woman he once called his soulmate. To others, he's a master manipulator, a man who couldn't stand the idea of losing control, a man whose own words, movements, and alleged use of tranquilizers raise questions that no one else seems able to answer. Through it all, two voices have remained consistent. Suzanne's daughters. They still publicly support their father. They've stood by him through both indictments. They were there when he walked free after the first charges were dropped, and they remain at his side as he heads into what could be the final chapter. But the world is no longer watching with innocence, because this time, Suzanne has been found. This time, the prosecution has physical evidence. And this time, the jury will hear a story not only of a woman who vanished, but of a woman who may have known her life was in danger long before Mother's Day 2020. In the end, we are left with one chilling thought. Will this trial finally uncover the truth, or will Suzanne's voice remain forever buried beneath the Colorado soil? Only time and the court can answer that now. Suzanne Morphew vanished on a peaceful spring day. No warnings, no alarms, just silence. A bike left behind, a house full of questions, and a family on the brink of unraveling. For years, there was nothing. No answers, no sign of her, only whispered suspicions and a growing weight of uncertainty that settled like fog over the small town of Salida, Colorado. Then, suddenly, the silence broke. Her body was found, buried in the remote wilderness of Saguache County, hidden beneath the dirt, the pine needles, and the years. It wasn't closure. It was a wound ripped open again, this time with more pain, more anger, and more suspicion than ever before. A husband, once free, now indicted again. A community, once hopeful, now divided. Two daughters, still defending their father, even as new evidence casts longer shadows. And Suzanne is finally home. But home is not where she should be. She should be alive, laughing, teaching, living. Instead, she lies still, her voice silenced, her story only half told. Who was Suzanne Morphew in her final days? Was she afraid? Did she know the end was near? Was she betrayed by the man she once loved? Or is the real killer still watching, hidden in plain sight? These questions have never been more important, because now, the trial is no longer about what might have happened. It's about what did. The animal tranquilizer, the body that was moved, the text messages, the cameras, the missing hours, the chilling gaps in time. And through it all, one voice has remained heartbreakingly quiet, Suzanne's. But in every photo, every journal entry, every desperate plea from her friends, her voice whispers back, a voice that says, "Don't forget me. Don't stop asking. Don't let this fade." So now, it's your turn to speak. What do you believe happened to Suzanne Morphew? Was Barry Morphew involved? Or is there still someone out there, watching, waiting, walking free? Tell us your theory in the comments. We read every single one, because every voice matters, especially the ones that can no longer speak for themselves. And if Suzanne's story moved you, if it made you stop, think, or hurt just a little, subscribe to Dark Trail Files. This is where real stories are told. The kind that shake you. The kind that stay with you. The kind that deserve to be heard. We don't chase headlines. We chase truth. And we won't stop until every last shadow has a name.